Good afternoon. My name is Narchin Linkage. I'm a journalist. I've been covering Turkish foreign policy for years now, and that has also involved covering Turkish-German relations. Therefore, I'm thrilled to be trying to moderate this panel on Turkish-German relations. Let me explain the framework to you. Friedrich Naumann Foundation has joined hands with the Center for Economics and Foreign Policy Studies, EDAM, to sort of put German-Turkish, the different facets of the two countries' relations under spotlight. And EDAM has issued a report, which you can find it in their websites, one on the political dimension of the relations and the other one on the military defense industry dimension of the relations. In a short while, we will be presenting these reports to you. Professor Zeynep Alemdar will tell us the findings of her report on the political dimension, and Dr. Can Kasapoğlu will talk about the military dimension. Now, afterwards, we will be joined with two distinguished German speakers. We are honored and delighted to have Mr. Alexander Graf Lambsdorff. He's a German MP from the Free Democratic Party, joining us from Bonn. And we will also have Dr. Ronald Meinardus, who is the head of the Turkey office. Now, these reports are coming very timely because there will be elections in Germany in October. So before we go ahead with these reports, I am going to give the floor to Mr. Lambsdorff. But if you allow me, I know Mr. Lambsdorff he has been following Turkey very closely. Therefore, he would give us his insights as well about Turkey as well. But let me just read his pinned tweet. He says, breaking news. Breaking news is ... I'm not going to say it. It's a bad word he uses. Slow down. Read books and longer articles. I was better informed when I got 2-day late Herald Tribunes when overseas. Now, as a journalist, of course, I am after breaking news. So I'm not going to ask you to give breaking news. We already have long reports to read in the EDAM website, so we respect your view. Having said that, if you can sort of give us the political landscape currently, the developments in Germany, and whether this might bring and mean change in German foreign policy and how that might reflect in Turkish-German relations. And before that, let me just add that normally I wake up and listen to BBC and Radio France Internationale, a French radio, and this morning one of the news in the French radio was how the ruling coalition in Germany was losing popularity. And the French commentator was saying that this was because of how the coalition has been faring with the COVID. And it came as a surprise to me because in the early days, from looking from Turkey, it was like, oh, Mrs. Merkel is doing quite a good job, but it seems that things have changed. But don't let me put words on your mouth. You can start from wherever you want, but let's start with more recent news from Bonn and Germany in general. Thank you.
Bajin, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be with Turkish friends. Missed you. We can't travel. It's really terrible. It's I mean it's that's the case for all of us, so it's not particular. But what you just said is correct. Germany is headed for an election in September, and the current trend for the governing coalition and for Mrs. Merkel is negative, because the perception in the German public is that she did not handle the COVID crisis well. In the very early days, we had rather low infection rates. We had a great sort of, centripetal movement. So everybody was getting together in German politics, democratic parties joining hands and passing an emergency economic recovery package, changing and amending the laws to deal with the crisis, etc., etc., etc. What happened then, however, is first, there were mixed messages on whether to wear a mask or not. Mixed messages are the last thing the population wants in such a crisis. Second, about testing. Who gets tested when, under which circumstances, what do the tests mean? Again, very unclear messaging. And then vaccination. We are behind Britain, Israel, other countries who have a much faster progress in terms of the vaccination of their population. Now, I don't know how it is in Turkey today, but in Germany, there's only one topic, exactly one topic, and that's COVID, Corona. Nothing else matters. And if the government is seen to have been incompetent at critical junctures along sort of this crisis year, the COVID year, it is only logical that its support should go down. What does that mean for me personally, for my party, for the Liberals? It means that we have a realistic shot at becoming a member of parliament in the fall. We will have two very important regional elections here next weekend on Sunday. And the Christian Democrats, Mrs. Merkel's party, is set to lose across the board. Dramatically. And with all that, it's going to be a very exciting year. It's going to be a very exciting year because it is the last few months of Angela Merkel. I don't know how it is for you. My children know no other chancellor of Germany than Angela Merkel. It's the end of an era.
This is
but when you ask about change,
the case with Erdogan.
Come again? You are frozen.
I said this is the case here with Erdogan.
Yes, I know. The difference is that we have the opportunity to vote in somebody else in the fall. That's the sort of the slight difference here, regrettably. But it means that somebody else will take the helm of the German government, and I am certain that some changes in foreign policy will follow. It depends a little bit on who the next chancellor will be. But what we see already is, I think, in the new leader of the Christian Democrats, of Angela Merkel's party, we see a man who's a truly committed European, Armin Laschet. If he were to become the chancellor, the EU policies of Germany would certainly change. Because Angela Merkel views the European Union as a mechanism to solve crises, whereas Laschet is more a Helmut Kohl person. He sees the European Union as something valuable in and of itself. And that's the difference. Now, if Markus Söder, the leader of the Bavarian Conservatives, becomes chancellor, it's everybody's guess what that means for foreign policy, because the Bavarians have only one foreign policy, and that is being nice to Russia. So that may change there as well. But it would be wildly speculative and not very serious if I were to sort of, be more detailed about this. What it means for German-Turkish relations, if we have, according to current polls, either Christian Democrat and Green, that's a possibility, or Christian Democrat, Liberals and Greens, what it would mean for the German-Turkish relationship is, I think, in the words of one of the wonderful papers, it would remain mostly transactional because that is the compromise that everybody can agree on. The conservatives are not in favor of Turkish EU membership. Neither are the liberals, really. The Greens are in favor, but at the same time, they're very focused on human rights, as are we. And so it's a very complicated mix. When looking from Berlin to Ankara, it's such a mixed image, such a mixed picture, that I would assume that the sort of the current approach, transactional, case by case, problem by problem approach, is going to remain the main sort of characteristic of the relationship. I see neither a major upgrade, that's quite hard to imagine with Turkey's human rights record, but I don't see a downgrade either, because Turkey remains an extremely important NATO ally, and of course a key country when it comes to dealing with the refugee situation. And so therefore, it's all COVID now. It's an exciting year in Germany because in September, Angela Merkel will leave. I don't see major sort of changes in German-Turkish relations. But the key question, of course, one of the key questions, of course, is what will happen in the spring in France, because the French vote as well. And I think, looking at I'm here in Bonn on the River Rhine, so very close to France. France and Germany will have, elections, and it's going to be an extremely exciting year. And all of this against the backdrop of the Biden opportunity that we have. Biden is there, but Trumpism remains. So what does Europe do to make the Biden presidency a success? I think is one of the strategic questions that we will face as well. I've been too long. I apologize, but I'm really looking forward to our discussion here today.
Well, Mr. Lambsdorff, thank you very much. That was very well put in a nutshell. From Bonn, then we're going to fly back our viewers back to Istanbul. And thank you for your remarks, because that would make a nice bridge to our next speaker, who is in Istanbul, but I believe on the Asian side. Professor Zeynep Alemdar is from Okan University, and she's the Dean of the Faculty of Business and Administrative Sciences. I'm glad that we have a women panelist, because I have recently turned down a panel because all of the speakers were male. And she's also the founder of the Women in Foreign Policy initiative. So Zeynep, the floor is yours. We're listening to you.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be here. I'm a longtime friend of FNF, so thank you for this opportunity. Of course, what Mr. Lambsdorff introduced is a great segue to what my report is about. And I was actually thinking, oh my God, how in 15 minutes I was going to be able to, summarize all the Turkish-German relations for 200 years. Our relations are so deep and deeply rooted. But I will start with the scenarios first. Because one of the things that our previous speaker has also underlined is that all these scenarios are going to be dependent upon how the new coalition government is going to take shape. So and how the Bundestag is going to shape itself is also going to, I think it will be very important for the European Parliament as well. So it will actually affect the Turkish-German relations, not only from the point of view of the bilateral relations, but also from the EU side as well. So in order to give our viewers and possibly start with the content of the report as well, maybe it is good to remind our viewers that there are 6 political parties that are in the German parliament right now. The Christian Democrats, the CDU, where Merkel is said that she's not going to lead anymore, and Armen Laschet has recently presumed the leadership of. And the Christian Social Union, they go into the elections together. They're the kind of the sister parties, and they've been in power since 2005. The next party is the Social Democratic Party, the SPD. The Turks would remember it from Schröder, in whose time Turkish EU relations and Turkish-German relations were also fine. Of course, we have the Greens. Again, the Turkish viewers would remember mostly from Cem Özdemir, I would think, and they became much more popular after the Fukushima incident, the nuclear incident in 2011, and they've been a coalition partner since 2013. Then we have the Liberal Free Democratic Party. that FNF is also supporting. We have the left party, the Linke, which is mostly the East German states are supporting, and it's kind of the merge of the leftist parties. And of course, we have the AfD, which most of us probably do not want to even remember or underline as a political party. But unfortunately, I mean, although it was founded in 2013, only 7 months before the elections, it's a parochial, ultra-nationalist party that entered the parliament in 2017 and 2019. So, given these, given after the elections, how these political parties are going to be able to form a coalition is actually going to show us the way in terms of the Turkish-EU and Turkey-Germany relations. It is interesting how COVID has affected the Merkel's administration and the recent news, but also, I mean, from what we have been reading in Turkey from the Turkish translations of the German news, let's say, was actually Merkel's legacy was actually continuing, and she's very powerful. So I doubt if this public opinion is as we are so used to nowadays, is very volatile. Will it change in 2 months' time if she does something and the vaccination numbers are increase or not? Of course, one thing that we are wondering if mostly the German chancellors did not become the chancellors right away whenever they were first elected to the political party. So Merkel also had to wait for 5 years to become the prime minister. So we do not know if Laschet is going to become the prime minister or not. And there's a chance that maybe, as Lambsdorff pointed out, that Söder might be the prime minister. So these will actually affect how the Turkish-German relations would go. And as if, I mean, a general look would actually show us, if you're following politics in any ways, you would actually kind of see, from the names of the political parties, how they look at the Turkey-EU relations or how they look at the European Union. I mean, the Germany has actually shaped its foreign policy with the European Union as well. It was with France, especially after the Cold War, they were the ones who shaped the European Union. So it kind of exported its foreign policy by shaping the European Union. It actually exports what it does in the European Union to the domestic level as well. So, and this transactional relations that we are talking about, what happened between Merkel and Erdogan for the past 10 years, what happened between the Turkish-EU relations for the past 10 years is actually a scenario that I'm kind of, I know that it's going to be true, probably, but on the other hand, I'm kind of scared, actually, that it's going to become true. And the reason for that is, once we look at this, this past 10 years, what happened was this transactionality, this, tit for tat, this, all the, every domestic issue becoming international, every domestic issue becoming bilateral between the countries has actually affected both public opinion so much. And it affected, and which, whose repercussions actually went to the Turkey-EU relations. I mean, if we just look at, 3 events in Turkey, the Deniz Feneri case, the Gezi uprisings, and then a topic that is very dear to Turkish hearts, the Armenian resolution, and then the coup attempt. These 4 issues have actually become so entrenched in the have become so effective, affected the Turkish-German relations as well. So these are, and you know, whenever, for example, even though when in 2010 Merkel dropped the privileged partnership clause from the elections, electorates, the election, you know, timetable for Turkey, we were actually very surprised that, you know, this privileged partnership, okay, we could get rid of this privileged partnership thing that Turks actually, pro-European Turks actually really do not like. But then, you know, she used the EU in such a way, very apparent in the migration deal as well, that the Turkish public opinion, who is, you know, pro-Western, who believes in the European Union, who believes in the European Union values, became very suspicious of these transactional relations. So this is why I am kind of worried about, you know, relations going through this, you know, volatile way, and every step of each country becoming active, like actions and reactions towards each other. It all, of course, it has because it affects the publics in such a way that in these, you know, polarized times, we do have a lot of attacks on people. We do have racist attacks on people, and this is worrying me. But on the other hand, of course, the good part of a transactional relationship is that, you know that in the end you're going to get away with it, and you know the economy is going to, the defense relations that Can is going to talk about, the economic relations that that one of our other papers is has actually highlighted. You know, it is very clear that you know, even though there's some type of you know, breakage between the relations, it will return to normal. So there's that, you know, there's that feeling that everything's going to be okay in the end. So this versatility actually, you know, makes the leaders and their relations much more important. And you know, unfortunately, it is the time for politics today. This is what happens in politics today. We do not know if the Biden administration is going to follow that same lead, where you know the relations between countries are actually going to be dependent upon the personality of the leaders. But it seems like it has been a la mode for some period of time. My second scenario, if, for example, I mean, it doesn't seem likely as we see, but you know, we don't know because even 5% of changes in the electorates and the surveys are actually deciding the fate of the countries nowadays. The second scenario that how Turkey-EU and Turkish-German and Turkey-EU relations would go was actually, if Germany actually decides to focus more on rule of law and democratization and pushes Turkey further into that direction. Well, unfortunately, what happened during the past years, after the Gezi uprisings, after the European Court of Justice rulings, it seemed like whatever Germany did in its power to actually stop, for example, Turkey to go further into the customs union renovation talks, or what the European Parliament passed in terms of stopping the accession process. It seems like it didn't work, because we are so entangled in all these security issues with Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East that it didn't work. So we do not know whether push towards the rule of law or towards democratization would actually be positive, and it might actually again support my fear in terms of having a backlash within the populations because of the vehement leaders that Turkey had. But on the other hand, given the latest developments, given that there's now a human rights reformation, there are these economic reforms that are being talked about in Turkey, it might be that Turkey's economic vulnerability might actually be used by the European Union and the Western friends to kind of push it gently towards more democratization and rule of law. But it hasn't fared well in the past. I don't know whether it will work in the future. But the third scenario that I liked most was this. Maybe I'm because I'm an academic and I like to sometimes I like to think big. Was that let's find new ways of cooperation, and this is actually pushing us. This digital transformation, the green economy, the global supply chains. What's going to happen with China? So the scale the collaborative issues up. So let's find new issues. Let's please forget about the Armenian stuff. Let's please, get rid of these. We are so sick of Cyprus. I mean, I know it has to be resolved, but Turks also has rights, a lot of right things to say in that. So I'm kind of thinking about this scenario which might be actually coined up with the transactional scenario. That can we actually find new issues to cooperate, and we need each other for that, and there are business delegations who are already doing this. Both the Turkish and the German economic interests, the lobbying civil society organizations are very aware. They're much ahead of the governments. And people on the streets. So one place that I would say for us to look at too, in terms of what the future might bring and what we should cooperate on as pro-German Turkish relationship people. That might be it, and it will. The good side of this scenario is that it is beneficial for all the political parties. So it wouldn't actually matter, if the Social Democrats or the Liberals or the CDU would come to power. But I cannot think of any political party who would be against cooperation on global supply chains at this point. But of course, again, it rests to the leaders. We will see what the elections will hold, and it's of course dependent upon how the world politics are actually going to take shape, because we are. COVID has actually shaken us up quite deeply, and we do not really know how the world is going to get back on its feet. None of the countries are now have the power to actually pull each other from any type of hole that they find themselves in. So it is very interesting. I think the next 5 to 10 years would be actually very interesting for political scientists to look at. And I do hope once I received this funny mocking award of Mission Impossible, she's still trying to get the European values to she's still trying to teach European values to pupils. So So, as an eternal optimist, I would say that I hope that new terms such as privileged partnership or those types of things would never come back, but also we would be finding new ways of cooperation and find new areas of cooperation for and new issues that we will be more excited to talk about rather than the classical old guys club discussions. So I hope I'm on time. I did my best.
Thank you very much. Indeed, actually, really, there is such a trend of anti-Westernism in Turkey that saying something positive about the West or the European Union or the Europeans is becoming really mission impossible in Turkey. I also like your third scenario, and maybe instead of the positive agenda, maybe we should call it a different agenda or diversifying agenda in bilateral ties between Turkey and Germany. Actually, at the end of your report, you're talking about the fact that the vaccine in Germany was actually found by two Germans of Turkish descent. And I was kind of sort of dreaming at home, waiting to be vaccinated. I'm still not above 60, thank God, but unfortunately I cannot get a vaccine. I don't know whether this is good or bad, but I was thinking, how can maybe Turkey and Germany could sort of cooperate in the production of the vaccines, because there's a problem of production, and Turks are known to be very quick and very professional in as far as production side. But when I raised it again, I tumbled in some problems because there is some problems in the customs union in terms of the pharmaceutical companies, etc., etc. But another problem, I guess, with this scenario, although I like that scenario, is that you said it's a win-win, and I think the problem in Germany sometimes is the fact that people tend to equate Turkey with President Erdogan. And those who are against Mr. President Erdogan thinks that any win for Turkey is a win for Erdogan. Therefore, sometimes that comes as an unpopular suggestion. At any rate, whoever comes in October to power in Germany, they will find a very complicated set and web of relationship. And one dimension of that relationship is the military dimension. I would now leave the floor to Dr. Can Kasapoğlu, who has penned the report with Sine Özkaraşahin. I am always dazzled by Can Kasapoğlu's speeches, because when he speaks, I can understand the difficult military aspects of relations, and it was intriguing to read that while there has been so many political problems, somehow military relationship have gone on, and somehow in the Turkish press, we haven't read so much controversy about it. I guess there was too much focus on Turkish US S-400 issue. I had the feeling that this issue, the fact that there has been some embargo from Germany, that they haven't been so much on the agenda. Perhaps I might be mistaken, but anyway, Can, we're all ears.
Thanks, Barçın. I'd like to also extend my special thanks to FNF for organizing this timely event and supporting this, I think, really valuable effort to frame Turkish-German relations in a multifaceted fashion, ranging from economic ties to political ties and defense ties. Last, special thanks to my colleague and this bright young lady, Sine Özkaraşahin, for all her contribution to this valuable report. Well, Turkey and Germany through the lens of defense affairs. Well, what we are talking about is actually two nations with imperial legacies, and their military cooperation actually goes back to imperial times. So there is a treaty. It is not a pop-up issue, the German-Turkish defense cooperation. There is a strategic culture, not only in the Republic times, but also rooting back to the imperial times of Turkey. So this is not something new between these two countries, two nations, to cooperate on military affairs. The bilateral defense ties are centered on many pillars, but most important of them, I think, is first, Turkey is one of the major operators of German military solutions. To be very specific about that, Turkey is one of the major operators of the Leopard 2 main battle tank family. The Turkish Navy is operating state-of-the-art German platforms, German solutions. And right now, the ongoing, we put a special emphasis on the Reis-class submarines project based on the German Type 214. Because coupled with Turkey's cruise missile plans, again, thank you, Barçın, for the nice introduction, and following suit to reduce the complex military thing into a more understandable fashion for you and for the audience. Coupled with Turkey's cruise missile plans, the German contribution to Turkey's submarine modernization in few decades can bring about a game-changer capability for the Turkish military that we could depict best as the Turkish Tomahawk or Turkish Caliber, the best-known non-nuclear, non-WMD conventional solution, because Turkey is buying, co-producing submarines with the German counterparts, but also pursuing really ambitious missile programs to equip these platforms. 6 platforms in class will enter into service in following years, and the Turkish indigenous submarine program will follow lessons learned from the Type 214 or the Reis-class program. So it is really important. The second pillar of the Turkish-German contemporary defense ties is the very fact that I think it is forgotten in both capitals, in both public opinions, and also both strategic communities. But it is crucial that both nations are NATO allies. So I strongly suggest both German politicians and the Turkish politicians, decision makers, when looking at each other and visiting and revisiting the relations, this fact should be kept in mind. Because of Turkey's EU candidacy and because Turkey's European agenda is mostly intertwined and explained through the lens of value-based calculus, let's say, this pure good old geopolitical fact that these two nations are NATO allies and committed to each other's security and defense through Article 5 is mostly forgotten. But I think instead of the European Union candidacy of Turkey, and instead of the value-based debates that we have been having up until now, this good old geopolitical fact of being two NATO allies is the key to frame and understand, and if we must, and I think we must, find a feasible way forward in Turkish-German ties. Well, apart from that, of course, there is the Turkish special attributes and the German special attributes. Having a quick tour d'horizon, Turkey, as my colleague Zeynep Alemdar rightly highlighted, is a gatekeeper for European demographic security, especially in the wake of humanitarian crisis triggered by endless wars in the Middle East, and it tends to continue so. The Syrian civil war and its humanitarian consequences is, I think, just an example that what we might face in near future due to the characteristics of Middle Eastern and North African battlegrounds. Plus, Turkey contributes to various NATO missions with really invaluable value, with really invaluable level of military value. Without Turkey, for instance, the European missile defense, the phase adaptive approach, would be really a different animal in the face of Iranian missile proliferation. Without the technically speaking, without the X-band radar in Turkey, Europe will be way more vulnerable to any kind of missile threat emanating from the Middle East. The AWACS mission, early warning aircraft mission in Turkey, is really crucial for the West, especially thinking that NATO is now a member to anti-ISIS coalition. The Incirlik base, the only alternative to Incirlik base, especially as to sortie generation for allied aircraft is Incirlik base. So this is more or less the key pillars of the Turkish contribution to NATO. Also, Germany is one of the key countries of the Western defense ecosystem within the European Union. It has the second largest cluster of defense ecosystem right after France. And within the European Union, since UK is not a part of the European Union anymore, Germany, France, and now Spain are running the one and only sixth generation aircraft program, which is really important, which means like way in 2040s and beyond, it will be the backbone of European military aviation. And as I said, all of these nations in this projects are EU nations. And this is really important, especially here, highlighting the fact that Germany and France gave a critical decision. They didn't follow suit with Italy, Sweden, and Britain. They skipped the fifth generation frenzy in military aviation. They stick to interim solutions, and they, in a very ambitious manner, I'd say, they aim for directly jumping into 2040s in a time machine, citing for sixth generation air warfare capabilities. If they can succeed, that would be, I think, the most aspirant, most ambitious defense project within Europe. So we are talking about these two important nations, and I think it is not a coincidence that Turkey, despite all the fluctuation, despite whatever you read on the Turkish press, Deutsche Welle, despite politicians from both sides bashing each other, at the end of the day, right now, as we speak, ask to any political scientist, they're going to see a crisis in Turkish-German relations. But go ask to the Turkish Navy or ThyssenKrupp, cooperating with them, they would say that Germany is the major partner of Turkey's submarine program. So these are the two sides of the coins. It doesn't rule out the fact that, though, arms deals are not immune to political fluctuations. Of course, Turkish arms deals were affected, especially due to the northern Syria campaigns, especially starting from Operation Olive Branch back in 2018. The Turkish arms deals were, like all arms deals, not immune to political fluctuations, and the rupture between Turkey and its traditional Western allies manifested its ramifications in the defense sector. I'd say the active protection system deal is really important here. Yes, Germany is one of the major partner in Turkish submarine modernization. When it comes to Turkish naval modernization, it is one of the most important allies and partners of Turkey. But there is, the more pessimistic side of the coin, even in defense transactions, with the northern expeditionary campaigns in Syria. Turkey saw that there is the anti-tank guided missile threat in the hands of the hybrid groups that Turkey has been facing, and wanted to equip its armored platforms with what we call active protection system. So basically, it is, in a nutshell, it is a subsystem that protects your armored platforms, especially main battle tanks, from shoulder fire and personal fire anti-tank missiles. Well, because of political reasons, Germany refused to modernize Turkish tanks with these capabilities. And at that point, Ukraine came into play and snatched up the Turkish market, a non-NATO nation. Ukraine came into play and snatched up Turkey's active protection systems market. This is really important in understanding, in framing Turkey's defense procurements, because although Turkey's major allies also manifest their values in Turkish defense sector, so far, non-NATO nations, in terms of technology transfer, in terms of co-production, and in terms of political immunity to fluctuations, actually proved more reliable for Ankara, I would say. Israel, back in the 1990s, South Korea, still, Ukraine looms large nowadays. Why? Because unlike the Europeans, these nations first are more generous in sharing technology and going for co-production options. But secondly, they ask less questions. So the Turkish, the reactions that Ankara received from South Korea, say, about using Fırtına howitzers, or the reactions back in 1990s, thinking Turkey's counter-terrorism operations, the reactions that Turkey was receiving from Israel because of using Israel arms are incomparable to those that Turkey received from European allies. But right at this point, an unusual NATO nation, non-NATO nation came in and turned the tables, which is Russia, and which is the widely speculated S-400 sale. By this S-400 sale, again, the main frame is Turkish-German relations, but it is affected because of the NATO ramifications, it is affected, and it could be further affected by the S-400 sale. With this sale, in numbers, Russia secured 13% of Turkish weapons market. Russia secured the lion's share in Turkey's strategic weapon systems market, but more importantly, the Russians managed to trigger Kağıtsa sanctions, US sanctions on Turkish defense industry, and even got paid by that. Why Kağıtsa is important, and what is it's in a notorious way beauty for Turkish-German relations, although at first glance it is seen as a factor in the Turkish-US relations. Kağıtsa sanctions can, if they go further, they can easily trigger a broader transatlantic crisis for Turkey's defense ecosystem, and inevitably that would have ramifications for the Turkish-German industrial cooperation as well. Well, going to, again, the geopolitical facts, I think a good flashpoint to monitor the fluctuations within Turkish-German, apart from defense cooperation, this time military cooperation, has been Syria so far. With the Syrian civil war erupted, we saw one fallacy in our intelligence analysis. I take the blame. All my Western colleagues should also take the blame. Declassified CIA reports should take the blame, because we calculated that at the outset of the Syrian civil war, that the Syrian Arab Army's ballistic missile program and WMD's weapons of mass destruction were regarded as poor man's atomic bomb in the eyes of the Ba'ath elite, and they would only use them as a last resort, just in a nuclear fashion. But we were all proved wrong, including, I say, the declassified CIA reports, that the Syrians, the regime, saw ballistic missile arsenal and chemical weapons as battlefield assets. They used both assets in the battlefield, and Turkey is the only nation bordering the Middle East. So NATO came up with the comprehensive missile defense program to protect Turkey. Germany was one of the nations to forward deploy Patriot batteries in Turkey. So, it was the honeymoon time, especially the beginning of Syrian civil war. It was the honeymoon time for Turkey's NATO geopolitical identity. Turkey saw the importance of being a NATO nation. And when it came to 2015 November, when Turkey downed a Russian Sukhoi 24 aircraft, I think that was the peak of valuing NATO among Ankara's political military circles. I can frankly say that had Turkey not been a NATO nation, the Russia's reaction could have been way more different, way more harsher on Turkey, and these were the really important benchmarks. Yet the same missile defense forward deployments, I think, showed themselves in a much different manner after 2016. I'm not referring here directly to the coup d'etat. The attempted coup d'etat was a real turning point in relations, especially between Turkey and the West. But right after the coup attempt, Turkey commenced its northern Syria campaign with Operation Euphrates Shield. So Operation Euphrates Shield, because of its anti-ISIS focus, was more or less digestible for the West. But when it comes to 2018, Operation Olive Branch, it was my first day in Germany during my fellowship with the SWP, and I recall the German parliament declaring a statement urging Turkey to leave Syria as soon as possible. The 2018 Operation Olive Branch and then 2019 Operation Peace Spring were also two benchmarks to monitor how NATO nations, Turkey's NATO allies, Patriot and in Italy's case Aster missions, but all in all missile defense missions, were politicized by the bilateral divergences as to the Syrian policy, because the missile threat emanating from Syria has already been there. There was no change in the Ba'ath regimes or the Syrian Arab army's use of ballistic missiles or chemical warfare agents, but we saw Turkey's NATO nations withdrawing their Patriot batteries and Aster batteries one after another from the Turkish soil because of political divergences with Turkey. Well, in the official explanation, especially with the Dutch, German, and the American withdrawals, it was for the technical reasons, maintenance, repairment. But after Turkey's Operation Peace Spring, no ally even made an effort to hide that it was because of the divergences revolving around Turkey's military policy in northern Syria. Libya, as recently observed, is another benchmark that we saw a German Navy frigate boarding on a Turkish ship, if I'm not mistaken, operated by the firm Arkas, as to exercise the European arms embargo about the Libyan civil war. So we got many benchmarks that can help us monitoring the ups and downs within the conundrum, within the pendulum of Turkish-German relations. But again, in a nutshell, what I would say is, and what I suggested in my paper to both sides is, more geopolitics, less columns, less New York Times for both nations, but more maps, more geopolitics. Just to to finish and sum up with a quick, again, geopolitical blue sky. Turkey is the only NATO nation that deployed conventional formations against ISIS in Syria. I'm gonna criticize both sides, and I'm sure I'm gonna make good friends from the both sides. But I think somebody has to tell the truth. First, to my German friends and colleagues, when it comes to Turkish operations in Syria, we see a lot of sensibility from our European allies. We see a lot of, Turkey out of Syria rhetoric from our European allies. But as to, the Iranian operations in Syria, which harvested 30,000 Shiite militia across Pakistan, Afghanistan, Lebanon, Iraq, and poured all these militia into Syria and created a second army next to the Syrian Arab army based on the National Defense Forces, and imposed all kinds of, Shiite type of strategic culture into the Syrian military sphere. We do not see our European allies being equally sensitive as to the Turkish operations. I have seen no European nation immediately calling for Iran to stop all operations in Syria and withdrawing all forces from Syria. I haven't come across with such a reaction. Likewise, I recall the time of Operation Olive Branch. Also, the German parliament was talking about Turkish armed forces using disproportionate force against PKK-affiliated militia. That I would not go into if this militia was, organically tied to PKK or not. Ashton Carter gave, I think, enough hint about that. But from a military perspective, my concern is with the word disproportionality, because at that very time, the Russians were bombarding the entire Syrian landscape with strategic bombers taking off from the Russian principle, basically using unguided munitions. And I never, ever heard from a European nation criticizing Russia because of the munitions that the armed forces of the Russian Federation have been using over Syria. Likewise, which I'm gonna, stop pissing off Europeans here, and I'm gonna start pissing off the Turks after that. France, for instance, Paris, although it is not in the scope of the reports, I think Elysee is less concerned, way less concerned about Russian Wagner activity in Libya, which has organic ties to the Russian military intelligence and which is responsible by the invasion of Crimea, when compared to Paris' reactions to the Turkish military operations in Libya. So compared to the European sensibility as to the Russian operations and Turkish operations in Libya, and also comparing European sensibility as to Iranian military operations and Turkish military operations in Syria, I can see no sober geopolitical ground explaining me in a satisfactory fashion that why Europe is so concerned with the Turkish military activism in these regions, but why not the Russian military activism or the Iranian military activism, even the Lebanese Hezbollah military activism. When it comes to piecing off the Turkish side, and to finish here, Turkey also needs to decide if it's gonna carry on as a NATO nation or not. One cannot just buy billions of dollars of strategic weapon systems from the Russian Federation in the aftermath of the illegal annexation of Crimea, and talk about further procuring or even co-producing systems like S-500, Sukhoi 57, and then naively pretend that it is okay, we're gonna just give 25% our weapons market to the Russian Federation, and we're gonna equip our strategic air defense forces with the Russian weaponry, and then we're gonna pretend that we are a perfect NATO ally in terms of geopolitical identity. I think this also doesn't make sense. What I suggest for both sides here to be more soberly geopolitical in weighing their relations forward. And I think these relations really make sense, are important in the 21st century, and should be read through the prism of utmost realism. Thank you.
John, when I usually listen to military issues, there is this Turkish saying that comes to my mind all the time. We have a Turkish saying that says, "Bad neighbor makes you an owner of a house," and I translate this like a bad supplier makes you a producers of arms. Actually, you haven't touched upon this too much. Having said that, the fact that Turkey has been producing drones, etc., it's being a little bit exaggerated as well. I understand. I mean, there has been a considerable success, but having said that, obviously, again, whoever will come to Germany in power, they are going to face with this dilemma. On the one hand, they would bring conditionality to their military relations, but on the other hand, if they go out from this market, then the market is being filled by alternatives, and that has the potential of pushing Turkey towards Russia and other suppliers. So this, I guess, will be a dilemma. So let us hear from our German participants again. Shall I continue with Dr. Meinardus with you and then go with Mr. Lambsdorff?
No, as a German voter and as a member of his party, I would very much like to listen to him because I might have a comment on what he says. Thank you, Barcin.
All right, okay. Mr. Lambsdorff, to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I've listened very carefully, and I've taken away a number of things. But there's one headline, and the headline really is Germany and Turkey need one another. It's underneath that headline. I don't want to sound sentimental. This is not about sentimentality. This is about geopolitics. This is about the web that ties our societies together. On a personal level, I mean, the interaction, the relationship is so close, but it's also, of course, a geopolitical issue. And when it comes to the military dimension, I was very happy to hear and read what we've just heard again, and that is that Germany is extremely important for the Turkish military, for the armed forces in terms of the equipment. I've also listened carefully as to the criticism of sort of our very critical view when it comes to the operations in northern Syria. According to what the Bundestag said at the time, we felt they were in violation of international law. This is, of course, the primary prism we use when we assess such emissions. But I have to say we were critical on other issues as well. I mean, it's not as if this was the only thing. And the big question really is, will the future military cooperation, technological cooperation in the military sphere continue as it's working today? Well, there, of course, it will be a question how the Greens will position themselves after the election. There's no poll currently in Germany that does not foresee a government without Green participation. And the Greens are very skeptical when it comes to selling arms. I'm not talking about the radical left now. Zeynep mentioned the Linkspartei, our ex-communists, a merger of different sort of left-wing parties. There you have a very strong, I mean, they're partnering with the HDP, and you have a very strong pro-Kurdish attitude. And so there's a very anti-Ankara, anti-Erdogan, but they're not likely to get into government. The Greens are. And when you look at the Turkish neighborhood, when you look at Turkish foreign policy, I feel that there will be a dilemma for the Greens. And I'm saying this in an analytic, not so much in a political mode, but in an analytical mode. The dilemma will be to on the one hand, maintain cooperation with Turkey, acknowledged Turkey's crucial position inside NATO. It's the only country really between the EU and the Middle East. I mean, it's something that people here sometimes fail to realize when they are too critical about Turkey. But on the other hand, their electorate, their party membership, their base is totally opposed to arms exports when there is the slightest hint of the possibility of these arms being used in ways that are not compatible with international law or, frankly speaking, German pacifistic inclinations. I mean, it's a little bit of a, this was a bit of a polemic remark, but by and large, it's going to create a big dilemma for the Greens. You could see this actually on the submarine issue, because for as long as Turkish operations that were considered to be, either difficult or critical or in violation of international law, were confined to ground and air operations, submarines were not an issue. But ever since the gas conflict around Cyprus, you have a maritime dimension. And the Aegean issues pop up. And it was quite interesting to see how radically, really, France sided with Greece on this, whereas Germany tried to play a bit of an intermediary position. And lo and behold, what airplane did the Greeks buy? The Rafale. There you go. Huh? But that was the sort of French dimension. The French are much less sensitive on these issues, sometimes to their advantage, I think. But that's a political judgment. But on the submarines, for the first time, you had an issue, on whether it was right to deliver submarines to Turkey because of the tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean and the maritime dimension. So I think something will be, it will require very intense efforts on the part of the Turkish diplomatic apparatus, including the military technological apparatus in Germany, to convince not only their traditional partners in the industry, but also a new political setup that may include the Green Party, and therefore it's going to be a challenge. This is going to pose a challenge for the future. When going back to the political issues, I really liked when Zeynep said, "Well, transactional, the transactional mode seems to be à la mode." I think it's à la mode because it is the pragmatic, realistic sort of way to interact with a country with which there is no teleological sort of clarity. We don't have, on the European issue, for example, on membership, and you're very engaged in this, I know this, but on that particular issue, there is no clarity of purpose, no clarity of political decision making. There are different views, but when you say Germany has a position on Turkey, well, that's always wrong. There are 100 German positions on Turkey. Okay, now Germany, the government, acts in a particular way inside the European institutions or vis-a-vis Turkey in a bilateral way or another context. That's all possible, but we have no clarity as to sort of the future or an end state of our relationship. And there, of course, this issue of the positive agenda. And you called it differently. I think you call it new ways of cooperation or new cooperation. But it's very close to I mean, that's what we have been advocating. I mean, in my political party, we've always been advocating this positive agenda. Not always. That's not true. We used to have a very clear pro-membership stance, but that has changed. We're no longer in favor of membership, except a few holdouts from former days. We are now in favor of a positive agenda and a what we call a Grundlagenvertrag, which is a foundational treaty. I mean, a treaty that is essentially something, looks like everything but institutions or something like this. And there, when you talk about these issues that you mentioned, global supply chains, digital cooperation, I could mention climate change. I could mention also the traditional issues of visa liberalization and the customs union. You're touching on a number of issues where I think there's an enormous potential for the improvement of relations. However, I'm not so sure whether this is really what the Turkish government wants these days. And it's that there was a diplomatic way of saying that I'm actually convinced that they don't want it. Because if you look at the way, for example, German journalists are treated when it comes to the issuance of visas. Now, in last couple of months, it was okay, but prior to that, it was extremely difficult. And so therefore, I think it's going to remain in this transactional mode. We will have ups and downs. The pro-Europeans inside Germany, of course, called for extremely strong solidarity with Greece when the tensions arose. Others were a bit more circumspect, looking at Turkey's importance in NATO terms, etc., etc. So it's going to be a continuous negotiation inside Germany on how to position ourselves vis-a-vis Turkey. And I think that can only lead to this transactional approach, case by case, as I said earlier, because if the two other scenarios, a total focus on human rights, civil liberties, etc., would of course mean a de facto freezing of the relationship. That's not in our interest. That's not realistic. It's not going to happen. But a significant upgrade, even with sort of a clear commitment to membership in the European Union, is not in the cards either, because it's not. There is no support for it in the body politic, given that, of course, we have refugees from Turkey in Germany who have political asylum here. Can Dündar, I mean, it's just one example. We have people who have fled Turkey and have been recognized as political refugees. And therefore, to have an upgrade sort of to a completely new level is not likely either. It's not very, how should I say, uplifting to put it this way. But as I am also a perennial optimist, and I hope that eventually we will get to a point where Turkish-European relations will sort of, move into a sort of a modus operandi that is less volatile, less hysterical, because sometimes it's purely hysterical, really, from both sides. I mean, when Erdogan accuses Macron of being, sick in his head or whatever he said there, mentally challenged, this is hysterical. This is hysterics, histrionics. Nobody needs that. And it of course always, entails the risk of whipping up people's emotions in a way that we don't want to see. So, but the path there, and that's my conviction, the path there really leads to domestic reforms in Turkey in terms of civil liberties and human rights. That's clear. It leads to a move out of the membership logic, because it doesn't work. Ever since we've started negotiations, the relationship has gone down rather than up. It requires a recognition on the part of us here in Europe as to how important Turkey is. And I took good note of something that Can just said. It's a post-imperial mindset, at least in part of the political thinking. I mean, it's Turkey. If one looks at a map of sort of the Ottoman Empire and Turkey today, and one looks at where the Turkish military is active these days, there's a striking coincidence. I mean, Libya. What on earth? Why on earth? What's the geopolitical interest of Turkey in Libya? Maybe I've missed something, but it doesn't spring to mind, at least not right away. And then you have videos, propaganda videos with the Turkish armed forces being equal, being in one historical row with the ancient armed forces. I think there is a lot going on. That means that for the time being, it's going to remain difficult. It will require experience. It will also require respect, mutual respect. Something that I always, I've been critical towards Turkish political decision making, particularly in the Erdogan administration. But I think Turkey is such an important country and such an old country with a proud history. It deserves respect, and something that particularly in the membership debate sometimes pops up is disrespectful behavior. And I think on both sides, this really needs to go. Because disrespectful behavior, either towards Turkey or towards, say, France in that particular case, leads nowhere. And so that's where I believe we are right now.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Meinhardus. Thank you very much for waiting patiently, and I'm waiting impatiently your comments.
No, I hope I don't disappoint you, because I was waiting, of course, and listening very attentively. So there are so many takeaways, and by our very, very knowledgeable speakers. I liked Graf Lambsdorff mentioned there are 100 German positions on Turkey. That's really a mind-boggling statement, and so there are many differing ways to look at this major issue. A major issue, I say, because when I was preparing for my mission here in Istanbul 1.5 years ago, and I visited the Foreign Office, there were diplomats who said that there's hardly a country which, in the understanding of our country, Germany, is as important as Turkey is. So what I'd like the dominance of Turkey politics for German foreign politics in general. It's a very, very special country, and not at least because of the more than 3 million Germans or Turkish heritage, German people or Turkish descent who are living amongst us. I want to put this into, I like what Can is saying, into the geopolitics of it. And there are actually 2 dates which I want to highlight. As we're sitting here, we're commemorating 5 years of the so-called European Union-Turkey refugee deal. That was 5 years ago. That was an event which shook the whole refugee issue, shook German politics and European politics. It is a major event, and we will discuss the continuation of this come the European Union summit meeting in a couple of days from now. And then 10 years ago, and the one is related to the other, the beginning of the Syrian war. And they're also the one related to the other. And from a clearly German perspective, and this also we shouldn't forget, 50 years ago, and I'm talking about anniversaries, but they are relevant, I think we should think about them. 50 years ago, the labor recruitment agreement between then Bonn and Ankara was concluded, and that was the beginning of quite considerable Turkish migration to Germany, and actually preparing the ground for a relationship that is so very, very special today. What I want to highlight in my brief comment, Barcin, if I may, is the linkage of domestic and foreign policies in this issue. This is not only due to the considerable amount of Turkish descent people in Germany, but it is a very, very sensitive issue. I would go so far to say, and Graf Lambsdorff would probably agree with me, that if you speak about Turkey and Germany, you have to have the domestic angle in your mind. If you speak about Myanmar, if you speak about, I don't know, New Zealand, it's not that, but in Turkey, it's very, very sensitive, if may way, and so politicians are, should I say, also very, very careful what they say and how they word it. Now, one issue which was relatively high on the agenda, and I liked how Graf Lambsdorff somehow connected it to what is happening in the Eastern Mediterranean, which is the doorsteps of the European Union. Is the submarine issue. With all due respect, sir, I mean, I'm a member of the German Liberal Party, and also in this party I belong to, there are more than one opinions. There are some who say the submarines should be delivered, and there are those who say they should not be delivered. And maybe, Graf Lambsdorff, you can put light on this. If you come to government, don't you need a clear position on this in order to tell the voters where you're heading, if you may? What I want to ask Can Bey, who I really respect, when I read his report, I was wondering whether this all is possible to be published. It almost reads like a confidential document, but I gather from you that this is all in the public domain. It is almost like we are reading a secret service document. So many, should I say, for me at least, who is a normal media consumptionist, very, very, should I say, classified sounding information. But while, Can, you are saying a lot about the drone issue, and you are also explaining the importance of the Turkish-made drones in the Caucasus War, and you are mentioning this and also the success stories of the Turkish producers. What I was missing a little was the whole issue of the maritime dimension, which Graf Lambsdorff mentioned. There is a concern in Europe, and I'm not only talking about those countries which are bordering on Turkey, and I'm thinking particularly of Greece. But there is a concern of these weapons, the German-made weapons, may be used or maybe be used in a conflict which involves EU member countries, and therefore, maybe to neutralize this concern, you can tell us a little about the strategic importance and the strategic. We talked a lot about geostrategy. What is the geostrategy of these modern weapons? And maybe also enlighten us about the Mavi Vatan, the blue homeland plan. There was a military exercise which I think was coming to a conclusion a couple of days ago. And these exercises and related maps, which we see in the media, also in the views of some, and also some in Germany, considered a little problematic. I would like to, coming to an end, say 2 words on this issue of transactionalism, which is à la mode in a way, and which we hear here and there. Now, I'm not a historian, and I haven't studied Turkish-German and Turkish-European and Turkish-Western relations in a more historic perspective. But what I have observed in the last couple of weeks and months and maybe beyond months, is that the quality of this relationship has really gone down. If Joseph Borrell is speaking again and again of a watershed moment, and if Western diplomats and also German diplomats I speak to in Ankara are speaking of a downward spiral, they are saying this with a lot of seriousness. It sounds as if this is more than we are just going to continue business as usual and find solutions. There are actually some individuals who are thinking of a bad case scenario, and there is in the literature also this scenario, and this is my last point, And here, one expectation and one perspective meets the other perspective. Because Barchan mentioned this. There is a trend of anti-Westernism in Turkey. There are obviously people who have a different strategic perspective for this country than that perspective of aligning with NATO and the European Union. Why this is the case is another matter altogether. And on the other side, there is this perspective in Europe. No, we don't need Turkey for whatever reasons. I am not of this opinion, but I see and read this. And if one and one comes together, and if they meet, and wherever they meet, we don't know, because we're, in the end of the day, dealing with countries that have elections, and where the people, in the end of the day, decide about the future of their governments, then there might be a scenario which is not transactional, but which is highly disruptive. Thank you so much, and I really enjoy the company of you guys and ladies.
Great. That gives all of my three speakers only 2 minutes to answer to these questions, but I'm sure they will do marvels. John, you have 3 minutes because you have more than one question, but I'm going to cut you off if it goes more than 3, and then I will go to Zeynep and Lambsdorff, Mr. Lambsdorff, and then we will close off. 3, 2, 2.
Thank you. I'm going to do my best. First, about the blue homeland concept, the Mavi Vatan concept. In brief, it is not a doctrine, it is not a policy, but it is a geopolitical concept. It is a geopolitical concept of redefining Turkish national capacity and extending it to the high seas through a naval modernization on the one hand, that incorporates structural change from a coastal deterrent for the Turkish Navy traditionally into a blue water Navy with power projection capabilities. The underlying reason behind this geopolitical manifestation, I'd say, is the perception, is the threat perception of Turkish political military decision makers that I could depict as the threat of being caged into the Anatolian Peninsula. And that threat perception, I'd say, is also fed by the maritime delineation maps and claims of Turkey's neighbors, that whenever they are illustrated, in a map, if you put yourself in the shoes of a Turkish political military decision maker, you would definitely grasp that well, this is caging Turkey into the Anatolian Peninsula. Plus, there is the energy geopolitics leg of this that Turkey understood, as well as other Mediterranean stakeholders, that energy geopolitics goes hand in hand with the naval bonanza in the Eastern Mediterranean. And the third, I wouldn't say a pillar of this, but a reflection of this, again, as I touched upon, is the character of Turkish military transformation, the Turkish aircraft carrier aspirations, TCG Anadolu, the Turkish amphibious assault vessel, which another EU nation, Spain, is Turkey's main partner. Spanish Navantia is a main partner here. When it comes to your question, so in 1.5 minutes, this is the blue water concept. For German voters, especially this party's voters, I'm very happy that I'm talking with the liberals right now, because I think this is the best venue to grasp the importance of these defense transactions with Turkey, because the followers of this party knows that every German voter is also a German taxpayer who has the right to demand welfare from the state. Okay, so look at the number of jobs that the submarine deal is providing in Germany. Hundreds of millions of euros that is providing the German defense ecosystem with this. And the third issue is the guarantees of German defense transactions, because if Germany backs off with a multi-hundred million euros volume deal like the submarine project, it would inevitably affect the reliability of German arms solutions to other countries. When it comes to the question that would these arms be used against other NATO or European nations, okay? Well, the solution is not selling them, refraining from selling them to Turkey, because once Germany does that, Turkey would look for other solutions in the market, and the Chinese are there, the Russians are there. They cannot match Germany in the submarine segment, but in general, in offering arms solutions, they are there, and they are looking to snatch Turkey from its traditional Western allies. So what is the absolute guarantee for making sure that these capabilities will not be used against another European nation? Again, going back to what I said in the beginning of my talk, Turkey's NATO identity. More than the European project, more than the EU project, Turkey's NATO identity is the real anchor, and the more realistic anchor, and the absolute guarantee that these arms and the Rafale fighters that French are selling to Greece will not be used against the Turkish armed forces, and vice versa. Whoever wants to test it, there is a very good litmus test for that. Go back to mid-1990s, go back to the Kardak or EMEA islet crisis, and think that either Turkey or Greece was not a NATO member at the time. And just project what could happen. So Turkey and Greece together being NATO member is the absolute guarantee for preventing, for preventing such a flashpoint turning into a disaster. So the issue, in one sentence, the magic bullet here is refraining from policies that can hinder or erode Turkey's NATO identity, like not selling these submarines to Turkey, but to foster Turkey's NATO identity, and showing the German commitment to these defense transactions would embolden, would empower Turkey's NATO identity, which is the absolute guarantee to prevent such an escalation.
John, thank you. Actually, it was from you that I had heard that, while trying to balance Russia, there hasn't been any single NATO country comparable to Turkey in forging cooperation, military cooperation with Ukraine. And I guess the German public is not so much aware of it. And Mr. Ransdorf, on Libya, for instance, you raised this issue, but in Libya, Turkey has sort of intervened in favor of the UN-supported government, and of all people, I would rather think that Germany would have been rather happy about that intervention. Anyway, I got additional few minutes. Having said that, still, let's try to be within our timing limits. Zeynep, I'm still going to ask you to be a bit short.
Okay. So about the negative scenario that Dr. Maynardus voiced, of course, it's probable. And that's why I talked about AFD. That's why I think why the German government actually in 2019 founded a federal foreign office department that deals with domestic issues with the Turks, why it started investigations in 2017 against some Turkish national civil society associations. I mean, there are problems that are looming beyond beyond who are we in this panel and what we are valuing and what we are hoping for. And also, I mean, just like the German population and the German political parties, Turkey is also very diverse. And I do think that not a lot of whatever the political leaders say, whenever we look at Turks, I mean, some surveys actually show. I think one of the best surveys that show what where Turks stand in terms of Western relations. The best question is, where do you want to get your kids to be educated in? And, while Turks say that, we don't like the West, we don't like Germany, or we don't like the European Union, they all want to send their kids to German universities, French universities, British universities. That's for sure. So no matter what the populist politicians or the radical politicians say, Turks do know that, our future is actually better in Europe. And also, I think we have to take all these, scenarios, everything that we talked, and the talk about transactionalism being a la mode. One of the reasons why I said that is because it is the modus operandi of the world today. What Trump did to the world politics, what Putin did to world politics, was it actually became this, became these realm of relations where everything is transactional at this point. We had businessmen running countries. So what Bolsonaro has done also, it's not just the Trump or the big guys. But so I think we should take in consideration that this transactionalism, the more that we pay lip service to it, the more it is going to be, the more it's going to be extending. So why I agree with John that yes, let's drop everything and look at the geopolitics. It's so important, and NATO is the one that we should stick to. We should also take into consideration that when Kardak happened, Clinton came himself, to Turkey. He visited Turkey and he said, hey, behave yourselves. So I think we should take all these relations and all we discussed with a grain of salt in terms of what the world is going through. So looking at the big picture, what's going on in the United States, what's going on in the EU. I mean, yes, of course, maybe Turkey doesn't even need to think about the EU membership anymore, because we don't know what's going to happen with the EU. I mean, as long as they don't kick Hungary out, what are the chances that they can actually prioritize democracy in Turkey? And it works, very well to the advantage of the anti-European Turks as well. So, and also COVID, I think, the world is not going to be the same. No matter what my optimism extends to, the world is not going to be the same in the future. So I think we should also, look at this bigger picture whenever we are discussing all of these. I thank you all very much. It's, it's been mind-opening as always.
Well, Mr. Lambsdorff, it's not me, the journalist, but the German taxpayer who have asked you to elaborate and clarify your position. The floor is yours.
Well, yes, but what Jan just said is analytically spot on, but emotionally less important. And when it comes to these issues, it's very often emotional. To justify arms exports in the German body politic, in our public in our public sort of the court of public opinion, with business considerations, economic considerations, is not acceptable to most journalists here. And so I agree with you. And to answer the question of Roland Meinardus, yes, I would clearly support that. Turkey obtains the submarines. The majority of the group would as well. But it's not as easy as it used to be. I mean, there is this old German saying, I'll translate it in a second. When it comes to these things, it's alles, was schwimmt, geht. So everything that swims goes, i.e. everything that swims is okay. So frigates or submarines or whatever, because the population cannot use this in Taksim Square against protesters, concerning the Gezi Park. See, that's you can't use a frigate there or a submarine. So it used to be totally easy. That has changed, and that therefore it's still difficult. What Zeynep just said on sometimes I'm struck by the parallels, and don't hold this against me. It's analytical, please, between Russia and Turkey, because in Russia you have this old division of the Slavophiles and the Westerners, the Zabatniki, and the Russian elite, the government, the Putin people say, oh, Russia first, and all their kids are in British, Swiss boarding schools. All their estates are in Marbella, Cannes, Berlin, or what have you. They're all Zapadniki. They're all Westerners. If they're honest, because the vision that these nationalist authoritarian regimes have for their countries is mostly not very promising. It's a reality, and so I was just struck by this. on. Let me just comment. It's the final thing, but it's a bit difficult. We could have an entire afternoon on this. Yes, of course, the government of national accord in Tripoli is the one that is supported by the United Nations. But it's also the one that is mostly supported by the Islamist forces in Libya. And I see we haven't spoken about ideology as a driving force in foreign policy here this afternoon. Why does France support General Hafta? I mean, I think it's mind-boggling. They shouldn't, because Hafta clearly is in violation of the United Nations line on Libya. But if you look at the domestic politics in France, Bataclan, and all these things, what you'll see is that there's nothing worse than Islamist terrorism inside France, and so therefore you have such a complicated, intricate sort of set of challenges there. And when Turkey stepped in on the side of the government of national accord, Barcin, you're completely right. They were within sort of the United Nations mandate. But I doubt that was the driving motivation behind the decision to go there. I think that had to do with the fact that Egypt and France backed General Haftar, and Egypt has locked up Mr. Erdogan's soulmate Morsi. France has sided with Greece, and Farage is ideologically close to Erdogan, a son of Erbakan, and so therefore it's a completely different set now ideology in foreign policy. But I think that it's still Erdogan's vision to turn Turkey into an Islamic republic, and one that is not. It's the exact opposite of la laïcité française. It's really the exact opposite. Now, again, that's an entirely different discussion. We are opening the box of Pandora if we try to do this in the final 90 seconds, but you provoked me. You mentioned Farage. And so therefore, there we go. I thank you very much for this. This has been brilliant, incredibly enriching. I learned a lot reading your papers and enjoyed this very much here this afternoon. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you all. And I have to extend an apology to you all and to our viewers for having failed as a moderator to keep up the time. I'm sorry, but I think everybody was putting very interesting inputs. And I personally have enjoyed it and learned a lot. So my apologies again for not keeping up with the time. And from there, I'm just giving the ball back to Dr. Maynardus for the closing remarks. Thank you.
That's very kind of you. That's very kind of you. When Graf Lambsdorff says that it has been very educative for an adult educator, and the Naumann Foundation, in the end of the day, is an educative institute, what better compliment is there? Graf Lambsdorff, I remember at the last show we were together, it was about EU-Turkish relations. You mentioned somehow we were discussing the submarine issue, and I see that's a topic for a special additional session. And then this idea was born to invite you. So be careful that we don't invite you to the Libya issue, because that's really a very sensitive one. I have very, very, very short points. Three short points. Number one is this will be with us in the future. It's a topic with the dynamics and with the German domestic politics dynamics, and information and dialogue, particularly dialogue, is very valuable. And I'm very, very happy and very pleased that we had a decent and I think a very civilized and also a very polite dialogue. And I would like to thank all of you. Can, while I might disagree with you here and there, and we will certainly continue our discussions, I would fully agree with you regarding the important role of NATO. And it might be of interest that the Friedrich Naumann Foundation is involved in some regional dialogue initiatives. We have a very proud dialogue initiative with Greek and Turkish young leaders. And we are also happy that this project is also supported by NATO. So also NATO using also the means they have, the contacts in Greece and Turkey, and with their support, we are doing this, if you may want, track 2 kind of effort. And finally, as this is my invitation by our good moderator, I would like to thank EDAM. EDAM is an outstanding think tank, Istanbul-based, and we are very pleased and honored to cooperate with EDAM. I would like to thank Barcin, our moderator, who did an excellent job in sticking us together and keeping the time. Of course, all the panelists, and finally, and not at least, the participants, because we're also doing this for you, ladies and gentlemen, who are sitting at home in front of your screens, and we know you have alternatives to do. The reports of the papers you may find on the website of EDAM. I can really invite you to read them. I can only say that Friedrich Naumann Foundation Istanbul office will continue working on projects which are targeting the partnership between Germany and Turkey, between Germans and Turks. And to advertise, just in a couple of minutes from now at 1800 Istanbul time, we will launch the new episode of Sizde Durumlar Nasıl, which is a very popular program where 2 popular and famous Turkish journalists, one in Berlin and one in Istanbul, Nefşin Mengo, I'm sure everybody knows her, and Nalan Sipa, are talking about issues which concern the 2 societies and the 2 peoples. It's this time not about security, it's because it's about the role of the youth, about those people, Turks in Germany, Turks in Turkey, who will determine also the future of our relationship. Thank you so much. Goodbye from Istanbul. It was a pleasure to be with you. Good night. İyi akşamlar.
İyi akşamlar.